There are no faithful adaptations of the Black Suit arc from the Amazing Spider-Man comics. Despite being one of the most iconic Spider-Man storylines, like probably the most, right next to the origin story for Spider-Man, every version of the Black Suit has taken substantial liberties that over time have completely shifted what the public thinks of the story, you know? The version of the story you think of when you hear the Black Suit arc, it's totally different from the comics. But is an unfaithful adaptation necessarily bad? Well, that's up for you to decide. I have a theory on it, but I'll lay my case before you and we'll see which way you take it. The Black Suit first appeared in the Secret Wars arc, in issue 8 specifically, on Battleworld, which is a mashup of different locations and planets created by the Beyonder in order to essentially create a battlefield where there could be a battle royale between the forces of good and evil. And Magneto. Now, Spidey gets the Black Suit in order to replace his battle-damaged outfit. In this version, a few key things are established. One, the costume is part of some other world that the Beyonder has appropriated. It's been dragged to Peter. Now, two, the costume is designed after Jessica Carpenter's costume, who first appeared in Secret Wars. And three, it's black goo that can mimic any fabric and respond to the will of its host. But one crucial thing, at this point, Peter does not know the costume's alive, it's just black goo. Now from there, after Secret Wars, Spidey kept wearing the costume, with there being no indication the costume was alive, or evil, or anything like that. However, we soon learn the costume is alive. It puppets Peter's body while he's sleeping, to continue Peter's agenda, which is to fight crime. When Peter discovers he's been having nightly swings without him knowing, he goes to the Fantastic Four for answers. And Reed Richards discovers the costume is an alien life form, a Clintar symbiote, and it loves Peter. Now, Reed tries to remove the suit using a sonic gun, but it ultimately fails. Peter ends up having to fight off the symbiote by bringing it to a church bell tower. The ringing bells drive the suit away, but Peter would have died in the effort to get rid of the suit if the suit didn't do one last thing before seemingly dying, saving Peter's life. And then from there, it begins to die. Now, at this point in the comics, it looks like it does indeed die, but we later find out it slithered down to the bottom of the church and finds Eddie Brock, someone who harbors deep resentment for Spider-Man because he blames Spider-Man for him losing his job as a reporter because of the whole Sin Eater arc. And he reported someone who claimed to be the Sin Eater, but Spider-Man exposed the real Sin Eater. It's a whole thing. Read Death of Gene the Wolf. It's a great story. The alien merges with Brock to survive, and Brock, at the brink of, let's just say, self-termination, he finds new meaning with the alien suit. And like any angry ex, the symbiote finds a rebound crush and gets resentful towards Spider-Man. Now, in the comics, it's established that the symbiote changes in response to its host. This is seen by Venom, the union between Eddie and the symbiote, being this grotesque monstrosity, a cruel parody of Spidey's old suit, now thoroughly divorced from its origins, as Jessica Carpenter plagiarized. It's here we first hear about the symbiote being this creature that needs to fuel itself on brains, or maybe chocolate. The comics go back and forth on that one. This is an element that was never relevant when merged with Peter, but becomes instrumental with Eddie, who often threatens to devour Peter's brains, and in the miniseries actually has to eat chocolate to stave off the brain hunger. It's a whole thing. It's really goofy. When the symbiote later on latches itself to other hosts, from Anne Wang, Eddie Brock's ex-wife, to Mac Gargan, the Scorpion, to that lame, underwhelming mafioso kid who the symbiote abandons as it's jumping from building to building because even the symbiote can't stand being with this guy. The symbiote always adopts the moniker of Venom, even over whoever that character was initially, like the Scorpion, for example. When the Scorpion has symbiote, he's not the Scorpion with a symbiote, he's Venom. You know, it overshadows everything because Venom is fueled by that venomous rage, that venomous jealousy, the venomous pain he felt when being pushed away from Peter Parker, and always carries with him the iconography associated with Peter. There's only change when he merged with Peter Parker and he resumes the whole Spider-Man costume again, or when he merged with Flash Thompson, whose singular goodwill and tactical approach to combat changes the symbiote, both physically and internally. When it eventually remerges with Eddie, the symbiote has undergone a healing arc of sorts, one where he gets over his ex and is able to return to his true host, Eddie, with a renewed sense of optimism and heroism. The symbiote also learns that it and Eddie have spawned a child, Dylan. This is a whole thing. Now, one significant change over time is the emblem on Venom's chest. Once it was a copy of Jessica Drew's Spider-Man. It was a symbol representing the legacy of where Peter got the costume. However, in later runs it was revealed that it actually represents something different. It's not a spider at all. It's a giant dragon named Grendel, the patron mount of the symbiote god of darkness Null himself.
What the f is going on?
This is a retcon, but it leads to a really good run on Venom, and a really great story that helps Venom elevate himself to not just simply a Spidey villain, but really a hero in his own right, adding to the mythology of Clintar, where these symbiotes come from, and showing all symbiotes as these sentient creatures who are neither good nor evil, but rather malleable entities who can change over time, and through relationships forge new paths. Now all that is all well and good until the symbiote merged with Mary Jane, who they have to merge to survive due to circumstances. It's comics, you know. The Al Ewing Venom arc is good. It's a good storyline. Even though it is very jarring to see Venom as Mary Jane, there is something interesting there because the symbiote and Mary Jane are not as close as Eddie and Venom are. They are two separate personalities inhabiting the same body. And we get to see more overtly what happens when a host and its symbiote don't mesh well, but are forced to be together for mutual survival. And of course, there's tons of Paul slander. I love any comic that slanders Paul. Paul fucking sucks, and I'm glad to see him miserable. But through this lens, what is the story of the black suit? Well, it's a twofold story. It's a story about Peter Parker losing control of his personhood, and a story about broken people becoming better after first becoming worse. Except for Matt Gargan. He sucks, and he's always going to suck. But most adaptations change this, and is that for the better, or is it for the worse? I would argue it tells a different story, and how it does so is up for your interpretation. The first adaptation of the Black Suit storyline was the 90s cartoon, where it changed some substantial elements that completely shifted the trajectory of the suit, really for all time outside the comics. For one, there's no Secret Wars yet. That takes place at the end of the 90s cartoon, not the start of it. And there's no Jessica Carpenter as far as Peter Parker knows. So Peter has no way to logically get an alien symbiote through Battleworld, and there's no base of a pre-existing design. So the black suit is just arbitrary. It's the symbiote's design itself. So how does symbiote get to Spider-Man? Well, it catches a ride on the side of a crashing spaceship piloted by John Jameson. Spaceship is in space. Goo got caught on it, we don't know where it came from, doesn't really matter. But now it crashed, Spidey saved the ship, and now the symbiote has grafted itself to Peter Parker. Also, Mr. Fantastic, he's gone, but Kirk Connors is here. A lot of adaptations will switch out Reed Richards for Kirk Connors because they want to have an establishment of Peter's supporting cast, figure out it's a symbiote, but I digress. Small change, somewhat. But those aren't the big changes people talk about with the storyline, no. Because this storyline changed something very drastic. The black suit does not puppet Peter's sleeping body, like in the comics. Rather, it makes Peter more aggressive, more violent, driven by wrath and rage. This fundamentally changes the story. It goes from a story of an alien controlling a person, trying to occupy the body, to a Jekyll and Hyde story. A battle for the soul between what is right and what is satisfying. Between kindness and rage. In the comics, the symbiote is only interested in working with its host, adapting to all the ways to best suit the host's needs. When it was with Peter Parker, it becomes a superhero. When it's with Eddie, it becomes a monster. When it's with Matt Gargan, it becomes a worse monster. When it's with Flash Thompson, it becomes tactical armor. But this cartoon turns it into a monstrous parasite, not a unit of symbiosis. It's something to fight rather than this amorphous force that can help you become more of what you already are. In this sense, the symbiote loses its personality. It's just a monster, rather than a hurt thing that hurts others. Now from there, an increasing number of adaptations look to the 90s cartoon for inspiration, as opposed to drawing from the comics, because it is a very simple story to tell. It's good versus evil. Simple, compelling. The majority of adaptations use the black suit for aesthetic purposes rather than anything else. In video games, for example, more often than not, the suit exists as purely an aesthetic worn by Peter Parker as an alternate costume, or it's Eddie Brock's outfit. It's an extension of Eddie Brock as Venom. And the black suit is taken completely away from its origins as this sentient creature with a personality, with wants and drives, with one key exception: the Venom trilogy. We'll get to that later, don't worry. But when it does exist as this sort of entity in other adaptations, it's just an evil outfit. It makes you bad. In Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite and Spider-Man Web of Shadows, the symbiote is an evil transformation, essentially, for Spider-Man. In Infinite, it is fascinating. It just kind of shows in the story to justify a fight between Chris Redfield and Peter Parker, which is interesting, I guess. And it's like Spider-Man's absolutely pulling his punches against Chris Redfield. I mean, yeah, Chris Redfield can punch rocks, do all that crazy stuff, but Peter Parker can do a lot more than punch rocks, I'll tell you that right now. But a number of these stories also adapt the Ultimate storyline version from the comics. Ultimate Spider-Man takes the idea that the symbiote has no personality, just like this evil makeup, to another level. Because in Ultimate Spider-Man the comics, its alternate timeline, the black suit isn't an alien, but rather a substance formulated to cure cancer, made by both Peter and Eddie's fathers, who are both chemists. The suit feels like a mix between the 90s and original storyline, with the suit morphing Peter briefly into Venom when he thinks he's found his uncle's killer. It responds to Peter's rage and hatred, transforming and overtaking Peter's will to eradicate the thing he hates. It acts again as an extension of Peter Parker, without the sense of responsibility, responding to base urges rather than logic. The focus is ultimately Peter losing control rather than being turned evil, power without responsibility. However, it isn't an independent sentient thing, it's a compound. It then latches onto Eddie, responding to his rage and animalistic drive, turning him into a monster, essentially. The story continues in Ultimate Spider-Man, the game, where we see that in order to survive, Eddie must consume flesh. He has to devour human bodies. The symbiote is more of a drug that dominates the host, forcing you to get its next hit. Eventually, the suit ends up in the hands of arguably the worst person possible, that being the Maker, an alternate version of Reed who is essentially completely mad with his own experience and power. And Reed reformulates the suit to turn it into an ultimate weapon, under his complete control. Now, we have yet to see the black suit storyline explored in cartoons like the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, even though Venom's already appeared in that, kind of, because the Clintar symbiotes arrive on Earth due to Norman Osborn's untapped exploration into the unknown. It's a response ultimately to the arrival of the Avengers and all the Chitauri stuff that's in the MCU. Except it's an alternate timeline, so it's kind of sort of deviated from all that. While the suit has yet to graft itself to Peter, its fight with Peter Parker and Doctor Strange results in a time loop that brings the enhanced spiders to Peter and thus gives him the power. It's a whole wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff that happens. This doesn't carry with it any thematic resonance, though, which is kind of a neat twist. There's not much to it, though, in terms of discussion. I just felt it would be important to mention. What stories do adapt the black suit storyline specifically? Not Venom, not just that, but the suit from the comics taking hold of Peter's body. Well, famously, there's Spider-Man 3. That brought in the iconic
going on?
But this adaptation lifts heavily from the 90s cartoon. With the Raimi film, we see the alien come from space on a meteor. Of all the explanations, it's probably the lamest. There's not much going on there. Just, why is it on Earth? Well, it fell. Of course it did. It's like The Blob, the movie The Blob, where the meteorite falls to Earth, now comes a big blob monster. Sam Raimi loves his reference to old B movies. That might be a deliberate reference, I'm not sure. There's no pushing into space, no exploration, no cosmic entities. It's chaos. It happens. There's no sense of Peter needing the suit either, because it's not inspired by anyone else, and it's just sort of there. The suit copies Peter Parker's actual outfit from the movies so far. It responds, though, to Peter's pain, because Peter is going through pain throughout the film. He learns that Flint Marko, now Sandman, is the man responsible for killing Uncle Ben. Again, like Ultimate Spider-Man, there's the tie to the murder of Uncle Ben to the suit's rage. And the suit responds to Peter's anger and rage by channeling it. It grafts itself to him and grants him release of that stress through violence. And that continues to escalate throughout the film. It also makes him a complete dork who dances in public. No other storyline makes Peter quite as goofy as this. If they do imply there's an aggression increase, it's usually a little more serious. And there are some serious stuff in the movie too, like when he hits Mary Jane. But it's always kind of hard to square that away with when he does this dance. But Sam Raimi, even though he famously didn't want to use the black suit in Spider-Man 3, actually does incorporate the suit as an extension of the film's greater themes, of how hatred can take hold of us and destroy us, and how forgiveness might be the only path forward. Harry Osborn is consumed. Eddie Brock is consumed by revenge and anger. And Flint Marko, well, he just kind of is there. He's a target of anger and hatred, but he himself does not exhibit anything. Now, the movie actually had an alternate ending at one point, where when Peter Parker tries removing Eddie from the symbiote, all that comes out is a skeleton. That was deemed too disturbing by test audiences. In the end, we just get Eddie rushing back into the symbiote to be destroyed with it. I kind of wish that Raimi kept that darker ending, because it fits with the themes of the movie a little better. That the symbiote isn't so much a symbiote, but a parasite. That revenge does eat away at you, and eventually, if you let it consume you, destroys you. Spider-Man 3 is often criticized. I like it despite its flaws. I mean, the movie's a sloppy mess, but, that's a whole other story for another day. Of the cartoons, there's Spectacular Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, and the Marvel Spider-Man, which I'm sure is not going to be confusing to say at all when talking. The most recent series, Marvel Spider-Man, has even a secondary synthetic symbiote suit that I think, if the cream white portion was white, it would have been really cool looking, but alas, we can't get that. It's just sort of a sad looking black suit without the value of the black suit, but I digress. All three do something different with the costume. Working from the most recent to the oldest, Marvel Spider-Man, which is to say the 2017 series, first seems to be adapting the Ultimate Spider-Man comic, where it appears to be a substance made in a lab. However, it soon becomes apparent that the symbiote is a living creature who is puppeting Peter, though in a way that makes the suit feel far more independent. Now, rather than simply being hard to take off, the suit physically fights Peter to remain on his person, firing webs to restrain him and binding him in tendrils even as he tries tearing it off. The symbiote also creates this feeling of rage to manipulate its host, and is ultimately restrained by sonic maneuvering, but Peter does choose to reunite with the symbiote for power-ups, using it basically as a last-ditch transformation to stop threats, including fighting Carnage, who in this adaptation is not Cletus Cassidy, but Thanos! Yeah, that's a thing that happens. Yeah, and during this, Peter does transform into Venom also, where the suit overtakes him and turns him against the Guardians of the Galaxy. Because, of course it does. Why wouldn't it do that? But ultimately, the suit exists as a power for Peter to fight, with a cost. It's a last-ditch strength boost, and the cost is usually he needs someone else to help knock him out. It's the least interesting of all these adaptations, I think, because it's just an evil alien that you use for power-ups. And it's the same pattern every time he uses it. It's like, okay, he has a suit, gotta beat the bad guy, now I gotta beat him again. It's like, okay, repetitive, rinse, repeat, and they never seem to learn anything from the process. Ultimate Spider-Man, though, turns the symbiote into this body-hopping force, more akin to The Thing, where anyone can be overtaken by the symbiote, which is interesting in its own right. Harry Osborn's one of the more noteworthy hosts, much like the Insomniac games would do years later, but eventually merges with Flash Thompson, creating the whole Agent Venom thing. Also, the Carnage symbiote's here, and it's like a clone of the Venom suit. Of all people, the Carnage suit merges with Mary Jane Watson, and this is years before the all-new Venom storyline turned Mary Jane into Venom, so it's like interesting how that works out. Ultimate Spider-Man is more of an adaptation of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. It's not necessarily an alien, it's just goo, and it's interesting. But it's also arguably the least interesting because it turns almost every host not into necessarily a figure dominated by their own emotions, but a raving monster. Again, unless the good guys have it, in which case it's a power-up. And that's not interesting to me, I think, as much. But then there's Spectacular Spider-Man, and here's where things get good. Spectacular Spider-Man starts off with the symbiote hitching a ride on a rocket, again, like the 90s cartoon. And it's a rocket propelled by John Jameson, again, like the 90s cartoon. And it's then that we see the suit graft itself onto Peter. Now from here we see Peter influenced by the symbiote in two ways. On one hand, it draws out his darkest thoughts and feelings, but on the other hand, it also, like in the comics, takes Peter's body for a joyride, continuing his fight as a superhero, though on the symbiote's more aggressive terms. He fights villains, including Sinister Six, completely under the alien's control while Peter sleeps, essentially. Ultimately, Spectacular Spider-Man ends with Peter overcoming the symbiote through a battle inside of his mind, inside the soul, and as such, overcoming the symbiote feels more like overcoming some spiritual cancer, which I think is neat. It's not the same, but it's interesting. And then it goes on to Eddie, and quite frankly, I think Spectacular Spider-Man does a really good job with Venom. I think it's pretty cool. But in Insomniac Spider-Man again, well, that's Insomniac Spider-Man. It's a wholly different thing, and the symbiote is very much an evil entity intent on creating a symbiote invasion of Earth. And while the characters use the symbiote in different ways, I do think that's the least Venom-like version of Venom. It's more actually like how Absolute Carnage works. It's more like it's an invasion storyline rather than a storyline of the soul. And again, it incurs rage and wrath and domination, but it's not necessarily one that seems relevant to the characters. Harry Osborn is very much overtaken by the symbiote once it grafts onto him. And while I do like the addition of the wings from the most recent Venom run, again, tying it back to why the symbiote looks like that in current continuity, it doesn't feel appropriate. But there's one thing I think that's odd. How the suit looks. Whether the suit is black, blue, gray, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that insignia, that logo, the big spider on his chest. Remember how I said from the start the suit is black because it's supposed to look like the second Spider-Woman's outfit? But in adaptations, we tend to see very few faithful recreations of that original Spider-Man logo. Rather, we often see the arms branch off. Two below the arms and two over the shoulder. Sometimes. Sometimes it's like the Raimi suit where it looks just like Spider-Man's actual costume, just black. And that makes sense. It's copying Spidey's suit. Okay, makes sense. Without a source of direct inspiration, what's it going to be based on? Of course. Apparently at one point Raimi was going to make an actual faithful black suit, but they chose not to do that because they thought it looked like a GIMP suit. Interesting choice of comparison, but okay. They ultimately went with a design that works well enough for the film. And I don't hate it. It's a pretty iconic suit, but I do prefer the original look. But it's also hard to justify why it would change in the plot. Now, Marvel vs. Capcom suit looks like just the Raimi suit, where it's just a black recolor of Spider-Man's outfit. It's with a white logo instead, I guess. Nothing too big there. Nothing too crazy. What I'm less fine with is when you get this, the spider legs jutting off in two directions. Like I said, under the arms and over the shoulders. This is the symbol that Venom had when the symbiote bonded to Mac Gargan, the Scorpion. It represented the fragmenting perspective of the Scorpion, how he poisoned the symbiote's mind in so many ways, because Mac Gargan wasn't like Eddie, who was a man dominated by pain. Mac Gargan was evil to begin with, so the symbiote deviated further from what it was because he was immersed in that evil. It's a diversion, a perversion of who Spider-Man is. A visual representation of Mac Gargan's evil. Hell, his eyes even manifest in the eye holes where the symbiote's eyes usually are. It's not normal, and it should be communicating a sense that this is not what should be. It's a perversion of what should be. And yet so many adaptations take this design choice. Interesting enough, the black suit in Insomniac's games does have the faithfully adapted logo at first. As the symbiote overtakes Peter's mind though, and then moves on to Harry Osborn, it shifts. It becomes the second logo. And I think this, again, works. The shift illustrates the symbiote's influence over its host here. It exemplifies Peter and Harry's loss of control over their bodies. Spectacular Spider-Man does the same thing as well, only it shifts from the Raimi-style suit, where it's just a black version of his normal outfit, to a more traditional black suit with the arms slowly elongating across the body. It again represents the symbiote's increasing control over its host, until it gets to Venom, where it completely overtakes the host entirely. And that's interesting. The symbol becomes like the Mac Gargan logo on Peter before it becomes more traditional, and that's a sense of showing that symbiote's control, a greater perversion of mastery. But then there's Venom, the movie trilogy. The Venom movies are fascinating because they're the first Spider-Man projects to be about Venom that don't have Spider-Man in them. They deliberately avoid including Spider-Man for that matter. So how do you get a Venom without Spider-Man? How do you get the black suit storyline without the black suit? Well, what is Venom without that? Well, for one, there's no logo, there's no iconography of a spider on his entire body. He's just a big black burly figure. He looks like Venom, of course, with the veins and all that, but he doesn't have that white emblem. But without the need for a Spider-Man, the suit isn't there to control Spider-Man. There's no grudge Eddie has against Spider-Man. so they just jump into the Lethal Protector storyline from the comics. Venom as a vigilante trying to do good in his own terms. And something remarkable happens. Because of this, there's no need for the symbiote to be evil. Eddie and Venom are two separate characters who merge and combine for their own individual needs. These films ultimately show two separate people learning to live together and work with one another, first having no respect for each other before earning the other's respect over time. And ultimately, the symbiote dies in the third film to save Eddie's life. And it harkens back more to the comics because, unlike other adaptations, the point is not to show good versus evil. It's meant to show control. Not losing control, but learning to let go a little bit to trust someone else. In many ways, it's really good of a storyline. In that sense, it gets to the core of what the black suit once was. Two separate people inhabiting one body, trying to help the other out for their own mutual benefit. And what's interesting in the comics too, I mentioned before the Mary Jane storyline, right? The Al Ewing all-new Venom storyline. It's very much the same thing. The symbiote and Mary Jane are two separate people with two separate histories, two separate sets of priorities who have to work together to survive. The current state of Venom in the comics is not as an evil goo, but as an alien intelligence. There's more symbiotes on Earth now than ever before in the comics. We know their culture, their history, their lore. And so it's not just evil goo to make you evil, this is an alien life form trying to survive. And that makes it very interesting. That elevates the story in so many interesting ways. It's not a story of fighting your own evil, but learning to surrender control. Or perhaps learning to not surrender control. Do these adaptations worsen the story? It does give a false impression of the symbiotes as raw evil, and I think it does actually limit the kind of stories you can tell. Even Insomniac, that kind of drew from Venom as an alien entity, defaults to making Venom evil. Venom the symbiote isn't evil. He's a living creature who's hurt. That's more of a dynamic story than just evil alien goo, than a parasite, than a predator, than a domination force. It's better to make this creature an intelligent entity, one with complex emotions, that it can feel, that it can love. I think the thing that everyone forgets is in that iconic comic where Spidey goes to the bell tower and he smashes the bells and gets the symbiote off him because of sonic vibrations. The Raimi films adapt that almost perfectly, except the symbiote is exclusively a threat. It is the true villain of the story, the driving manifestation of the film's themes. But in the comics, the symbiote's last act before seemingly dying is saving Peter. At the end of the day, it still loves Peter. There's a storyline also, Amazing Fantasy 317, I think the issue is, where Peter Parker is fighting Venom on a beach, and the only way he can beat Venom is not through overpowering him, because Venom is planned around having any of his weaknesses in the area. Peter just takes his outfit off and tells the symbiote to merge with him. And the symbiote is torn, divided, clinging to Eddie, but also reaching for Peter. And that strain is what beats it. The symbiote is a living entity with wants and desires. To make it an invading force is boring, but I think there's a lot more to what you can do. And as the comics have shown recently, there's a lot more you open up when you make the symbiote a character. And I think the success of the Venom movies too has helped with that a little bit as well. When the symbiote comes back in the films, I do hope they avoid just making the goo evil for the sake of being evil, and more an intelligence that Peter simply cannot live with.
I won't forget you, buddy.